And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And now your host, Mike Hewitt.
Hey, good morning, everybody. In the studio with me this morning is Ludwig von Wiedendorski, who I often refer to as Matt Wiedenhoff. Matt, thanks for joining in. And obviously, Brian Thomas is keeping us on time and on track. Listen, folks, what I wanted to do this morning is do this my annual, if you will, the real State of the Union following the president's remarks yesterday. Last year was a monologue, and this year I wanted to lighten it up a little bit. It was the old joke, lighten up, Francis, and just take a look over the topics that he covered, but maybe from a little bit more of a lighter perspective, if nothing else, maybe a real perspective rather than the bluster and politics of it. For me, it sounded, listening to the president, it sounded a lot like a campaign speech designed to make sure that the chair is filled with a Democrat. I found a lot of it fascinating, not so much for content, by the way, but what I found fascinating was that he called for he said he regretted that there was so much rancor that he wasn't able to quell the anger or the differences and the ability for folks to come together. And I found that such a fascinating thing, because I had, through most of his term in office, found him to be the person that caused it, frankly. And things like early on when he had a gathering of senators in a meeting, and he explained to John McCain that his opinion didn't count because he lost and Obama won. Those kind of things, and by the way, I'm not a McCain fan, but those kind of comments and all of the comments he's made along the path, equating the Republican Party to terrorists and the enemies, by the way, that he's embraced with Iran. And I'm listening to him talk last night, and I'm going, really? You're sorry that the rancor hasn't been set aside. You've caused it. He is certainly no Ronald Reagan, nor is he a Tip O'Neill. And I say that because those two could have differences, but respectful differences. They could go and they could have a conversation. That's not the attitude he brought. And interestingly, he didn't not just have a poor relationship with the Republican Congress, but from all reports, he had an absolutely atrocious relationship with members of Congress from his own party. He made himself an island and then felt alone over it. And I'm going, really? This is you, not the rest of the world. If you're a person and you think that the entire world is wrong and you're the only one that's right, you need to take a long look in the mirror. I don't care if you're just a person, just somebody like me, or if you're the President of the United States. If you've made yourself an island, you need to slow the navigation speed and take a long look. I believe that. What do you think, Matt? How did you take last night's? Did you watch it to start with?
I did. Unfortunately, my kids were upset that we watched it, because we watched the third series of the Star Wars movies.
Yep. And
I told me we could watch the next one, the original New Hope one. But, oh, wait, we got to watch State of the Union first. And well, they weren't real happy, but I made them watch it, and they kept telling me, we don't like this guy. Why we got to watch this? I said, because the reality is, it's the last time we got to see this guy. We need to know what's going on. You got to know your enemy better than your friends. We got to watch and see what's going on. All I felt the whole time was a campaign speech.
It was. And that's okay. When you come to by the way, a lot of people on Facebook remind us, and I haven't looked back to history, so I've not confirmed this, but I had put on Facebook yesterday evening that it warms my heart. I'm watching the last State of the Union with President Obama. And then a number of people chimed in that reminded me that Carter gave a State of the Union speech 4 or 5 days before Reagan was sworn in, and I've not looked back to see if that's the case, but they were saying don't get so comfortable because he may be back because he's pretty popular with himself.
Well, he did personally say it was his last time, but he also said we'd save money with health care and everything else. So
you can keep your doctor.
Yeah, keep your doctor. So I'm not sure I believed it, but it did, and And I agree with you about him putting himself on the island. I think it was the State of the Union right after the 2012 election that somebody yelled something to him, and he goes, yeah, but I won.
Right. Yeah, and so that kind of thing is not statesman. That's not the comment of a statesman. That's not something Ben Franklin would have bellowed at one of the opposition. It's not something that JFK would have done. Just so I make sure that everyone knows I'm not trying to be partisan about this. That's something you do in the sandbox when you've wrestled the toy away from whoever your opposition is in the sandbox. Okay, I got the Tonka. It's mine now. Don't touch it. Well, I don't believe that's how you run a country, and I think that's why the real State of the Union differs greatly from his presentation. I mean, he talked about the great relationship that he's built and how our image abroad is so much better than when he took office. And it's almost a complete detachment from reality. While he was complimenting himself for the Iranian deal, we're waiting to find out whether they're going to release the 10 sailors, and thank God they did. And is that a result of his relationship with them? Maybe, but to have that conversation without knowing, to me, felt disconnected from reality. Same as healthcare does, because when he defined healthcare last night as like a stopgap, I went, holy mackerel, that's not how it's been pounded down our throat for the last 8 years. Something totally different than a transition stopgap policy that you can have if you don't have your... I'm listening to that going, no kidding. I wished I could take that excerpt back in time and play that back when Nancy Pelosi was saying you got to vote for it before you know what's in it. And because they're disconnected. It doesn't match up with truth. By the way, I'm not trying to bash him today. That's not the point of me doing a real State of the Union. But you can't help but sit and pause. And I'm scratching my head, by the way, while I was watching it, thinking, is all of Washington, D.C. detached from reality, or is it just him? And I say that, we've talked a lot on this show about, he mentioned health care. And with the Affordable Care Act and all that. Listen, less people by percentage have access to affordable health care now than they did in 2007, and by far less people by percentage have access to affordable health care than they did in 1964. It's just math. This is not ideology. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's not socialism versus capitalism. None of that. It's just math.
I would think that when you use the word even affordable in it, it's got to be less people are able to get affordable health care since this thing's passed.
Average cotton ball now for an overnight stay is $14 for a cotton ball. Not even a bag of cotton balls. No plural here. When a person does an overnight stay in a hospital and it exceeds $100,000 in a 7-week stay, something is off the rails. When health care overall now exceeds 40% of the average American's income, 1964 it was 5%. Something is off the rails. But listen, when he got to education, and he was talking about the things that he'd done, I disagree with him, but then he said what we need to focus on now is lowering cost. In fact, I verbally outwardly said, I said, finally he's saying something I agree with. And then he went on. His idea of creating affordable higher education is for government to pay for it. And the problem with it is that doesn't work. It's how we ended up with $14 cotton balls. It's how we ended up with an 1,100, according to Huffington Post. Imagine me quoting Huffington Post. Ooh. According to Huffington Post, education has went up 1,140% in 3 decades, 30 years. And you go, 1,140%. And that's all because government's been helping.
Let's see, I'd like to see what that percentage is in the last 8 years. Because when he said that they want to lower the cost, I go, but you raised, I literally said it. Yeah. You raised it.
He did raise it. And paying for everyone's first 2 years of college, we'll raise it again.
It's not free, right? I mean, somebody's paying that bill.
The 1%.
Yes.
But when you do the math, listen, by the way, I'm not even locked into the class. I hate classism, folks. I literally, passionately oppose the concept of classism. When I hear my side or your side, anybody's side start out with middle class, low class, high class, I said, I want the America that has opportunityism. I want opportunityism. And an 1,140% increase. By the way, coincidentally, not only has our education went up that amount, healthcare and education both, the two segments of our domestic economy that have both went up within 2 or 3% of each other over the same period of time are the exact same two segments of our society government has helped us the most with. And so I say, stop helping, please. Stop helping.
Was it Reagan phrase? The worst statement is, I'm government, I'm here to help.
Yeah, and it is, because I mean, first off, they've got an administration. The last time I saw the number, it was 87%. So if I wanted to help a poor person, okay, and I do, by the way, that the most expedient way to help them is give them the dollar, because if you give the dollar to the government, they're only going to get 13 cents of your dollar. And I'm thinking, what? What kind of thinking can a person must they employ to have that make sense to them? I don't get it. Doesn't matter. So that's health and education. Higher education, you know a little bit about that because you're an adjunct professor. When I look at higher education, it isn't a question of me fighting the curriculum right now, which I do, by the way. But when I look at it, and I don't expect you a comment because I don't want to get you in trouble with your employer, but I'll make the comment. It is more top-heavy than it could ever possibly be. If you took a roster of employees at a university now, you pick the university, doesn't matter to me. If it receives public funding, what I'm going to tell you is true. It is outrageously top-heavy. The administration, the faculty, the actual people that are doing the teaching, that number we could debate whether it stayed the same plus or minus. I don't know that that's changed a lot in the last 100 years, by the way. But the administration, they trip over each other. Get a list of vice presidents from Wayne State University. The list is a whole page long. They're making monster-sized dough relative to their part-time jobs. And if you look at their contribution, nowhere in the private sector could you work the few hours that they work, generate the few production that they do, and make $250,000. Nowhere can you do that. It's insane to me that we all go, jeepers, that's really expensive, rather than saying, how can we actually drive the cost down? By the way to do that is market-driven. That's where we as a market say we're not going to pay for that. So you better rethink yourself. Get rid of 16 of those 17 high-paid administrators. Stop buying everybody a Buick Park Avenue. Okay, literally, by the way, literally. Stop doing that because we're not paying for that. We're here for education for our young. We're not here to feather your nest. And we've kind of lost, I think we've lost the perspective of what some of these institutions are. It's the same way at the hospitals, by the way. If you got rid of all the administrative staff and the billing department, oh my goodness, the billing department has become massive. Get rid of all of those folks, literally, and leave it with doctors and nurses, people that are actually engaged in health care, and all of a sudden you would have relatively speaking, a normal-priced cotton ball.
Well, I can tell you, Mike, and I'm not coming as a teacher or anything, but when I taught economics, we talk about price elasticity. And at what point is it elastic, which means the market will no longer support it. And there's things that are inelastic, that no matter what the prices will support. I mean, water is inelastic. But we talked about college education.
Wait, pause for a minute. Tell folks what inelastic means.
Inelastic means that no matter what price level, you're going to pay for it. Gasoline, everybody thought was inelastic. No matter what it went to, you were going to have to pay for it. And
when I was in 7th grade, this is why I paused you, just to talk about when I was in 7th grade. When I was in 7th grade, the teacher went on at great length. I remember it like it was yesterday. He was teaching that if everyone lost their electricity and you're the only one left with ice, and you charged some exorbitant amount for the ice, that you were gouging and that was immoral.
Yeah, that's if people are willing to pay for it, it's a pricing. It's the elasticity of the pricing.
So you think that's fine?
Well, it's not that I think it's fine.
I'm
it's
just
an economics term. I don't believe in price gouging because, like you saw it with like Hurricane Sandy, people buying water in Michigan and going out and selling it for $50 a case. There's to me, with something like that, there's a humanity involved beyond capitalism.
There is, but let me tell you about capitalism, and I can use Renegade River as an example. During the ammunition drama, when things like especially .22 ammo was unavailable, and folks, the people that were getting a hold of the ammo were getting just stupid money for it.
Oh, yeah.
A brick of junk ammo, 500 rounds for those that don't know. So you got 500 rounds of a lesser than quality plinking ammo for shooting holes in paper plates. They were getting $75 up to $100 for 500 rounds for something that used to cost, in fact, just before the Sandy Hook supposed shooting, that was costing $18 to $19. And then suddenly it was pushing $100. I didn't do that at Renegade River. And my reason for not gouging people in fact, I passed on getting ammo when the pricing had gotten to the point from some of the distributors where it was gouging by my definition, I said, I'm going to pass because I don't want the appearance of me gouging either. And the reason isn't because I'm injecting some morality into it. The reason is capitalism, because I wanted to do business with my customer base after the drama was over. I don't want to be part of the crew that took your head off because you couldn't get it anywhere. So, yes, morality plays a part in it, but I think capitalism plays a part in it. Renegade River's got a very nice customer base. I'm very proud of what we've been able to, the partners in the community we've been able to create. But the way to do that is to have integrity and be honest, in my view. Listen, folks, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, I want to dial into some of the other things that from a grassroots level that are what I believe are the reality of the State of the Union. Folks, we'll be right back.
And back to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. Segment 2.
So I'm looking through my notes. Education, a fair shot for everyone were his words. Listen, I think everyone ought to have an equal opportunity. That doesn't mean that everyone will have an equal result. Some folks are going to work harder. And there's nothing that he, nor I, nor government policy can do to change that. It doesn't. That's not how it works.
Being born in this country gives every person the opportunity.
Well, it gives them. No, that's not always true. And let me give you some examples where I actually agree with, and I don't agree with why, nor do I agree with the cure. But when you look into inner city America, I don't really care what city or what state, those folks don't have, in most cases, the same opportunity you did. They just don't. Now, the difference between how he views it and how I views it, first off, I don't believe that it's entirely racism, although I think that plays a part. Mm-hmm. What I see when I look is, it reminds me of when I was young and Sally Struthers was doing the little commercials on send money to the Ethiopian folks that are in the desert, and there's no water and there's no health care, and they showed a picture of a destitute child, and for only $9.95 you can save Ethiopia. And I remember watching that as a very young man back in the 70s. I'm almost 55 now. And I'm watching and I'm thinking, as a young person, why don't they just move? Why isn't Sally Struthers serious, trying to raise money to move these folks? And so if and by the way, I can prove that I'm saying what I believe. When I look at Detroit, or when I look at Watts, LA, or when I look at the south side of Chicago, and I look at the parents there, because some of those folks there really passionately want to have a brighter future for their children, the same as you do, the same as I do. And I think, why don't they move? Honest, I think that. Why don't they move? One of the great things about the experiment of America was when states didn't, each state was an experiment. Mm-hmm. And by the way, part of the problem that we have in America is the balance of government. That's going to be the Enigma report today, so I'll touch on it real briefly. The balance of government between states and federal has a huge impact on your lifestyle. And my example is that those that like a central government, powerful, and would rather get rid of the concept of states' rights, and if you say states' rights, you're immediately plugged into the racism column. But the way it was supposed to be is, if you didn't like how Massachusetts did it, you could move across the border to Connecticut. You could go to Michigan. If you didn't like what Governor Snyder or our government in total was doing or becoming, you could go try one of the other experiments that were going on within the states. That's what federalism was supposed to do. So what you found, for instance, if a state had the right to secede, then the government had to be really responsible for its activity. When a state doesn't have the right to secede, government loses that focus of service and responsibility. It just does. But we'll save that for the Enigma report. But when I look at what we've got going now, I think that why don't they move? And I'm sure there's some silly reason, some real reason that I sillily don't see, but I don't see it if it's there.
I remember watching commercials like what you were talking about with the Sally Struthers.
Yeah.
And I didn't think, why didn't they move? I thought, why am I giving it to them when I know we have that problem 3 or 4 blocks away from us? Why aren't we giving it? Listen, if I'm going to donate, I would rather help ours.
I've got in trouble on that point on this show, but also in my political life. Because when I watch, and I'm going to have some listeners probably really mad at me now, but when I watch churches do missions to somewhere far away, and they'll load up all of these assets, monies, and things that they've raised, and they'll send volunteers, and they'll go to some country that most people don't. I think charity begins at home.
Yeah.
So they take all of those resources down to Metropolitan International Airport in Detroit. But by the way, Detroit needs some help. I don't know if anyone's noticed that. And they load up their stuff and they send it to somebody that probably hates us. But listen, it's not that I don't want to help somebody somewhere else, but I honestly believe that a strong America, in fact, I've said this before, I don't think that we can save America unless we save the American family. And to save the American family, we've got to save inner city America. I think these things they're not disjointed, to use my word about the State of the Union. These things they add up together. Gun violence. When you look at gun violence in America, if you take out inner city math, gun violence is immeasurably low, literally immeasurably low. It's almost non-existent until you plug in the inner city numbers again. And to me, it goes back to saving family and saving the inner city. And so I think, why are we sending all of our dough to some country that not even, I don't get that, honest, I don't. Now, if we had everyone in America that actually had an equal opportunity, to use President Obama's words and yours, then I'd say absolutely. If we've got ourselves healed, then I think good stewardship is help other people. I absolutely agree with that, but not first. We can't leave ourselves weak and think that we're going to actually help anybody else. That's how I see it. Now, maybe I'm all wet's how I see it. What do you think?
I agree. I agree and I disagree. Part of being an American, and I think part of being an American exceptionalism, which is what I believe, is that everybody does have the opportunity. It may not be at the same level or have the same resources.
Then it's not the same opportunity. If it's not the same
But the
level.
opportunity to succeed is possible. It happens. There's people like me that end up worse off than people in the inner city. When there's people in the inner city who end up with the opportunities. I mean, I look at people like Magic Johnson who...
In the mid-'90s, I was a single parent with 4 daughters, and I was in southeastern Michigan. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I don't need to be raising girls that are in the higher side of elementary school, almost out, and in junior high, in the culture that exists there. So I made the choice to start sending my resume to the West Side. I sent it everywhere until I started getting interviews, and then here I am. I've been here since '98 is when I finally was able to take the position that I wanted and get my family here. So I made that move, and by the way, it didn't just happen. I had to work my butt off. Exactly. Opportunity had to be made. I agree with you there. The difference is that I've got a fairly solid education, so I can speak well, I can write. Some people read my book and went, he can't write. But I think I can write okay. I can write okay enough to write a check. I can write okay enough to fill out a resume and include a cover letter. Some of the folks that we're talking about in inner city, and we can debate whether it's their fault or not. I don't think it's their fault. I think it's central government's fault. Mm-hmm. It's really where I play. And by the way, I think it was done on purpose.
Oh, I agree. I do.
So if you've got a person that is functionally illiterate, and they're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, and they cannot fill out a job application, literally, they don't have the same opportunity you do. And they're probably going to be angry over it, and I don't blame them. The question is what as a society are we going to do about it? I think the answer is to create more opportunity, not to generate more welfare that put them there in the first place.
Exactly.
And by the way, all through the voucher argument, the Democratic Party took a position against vouchers. Vouchers provided for exactly what I'm talking about. If I were a parent of a children in a failed educational system, Detroit's educational system, aside from being $2 billion in debt, aside from that, they create. And I don't know that this is a fault of the teachers, by the way. I'm not taking a shot at them. I think it's a fault of the lack of family. I really believe that. But for whatever the reason is, the educational results are literally on par with Haiti. And so school vouchers, some form that would have allowed them, and by the way, there is some things now with school choice that they can move forward. So you got the parents that really care, are willing to put in the extra effort and take their child out of those failed education systems. We see that here in Muskegon County also. You can make a choice to say, no, my sons and daughters, they are not going there. And I think that's competition. And I think that will make the weak schools better also. And if they dry up and blow away, some of the folks that want to just... It's kind of funny, the progressive side, they're the ones that always talk about leaning forward, but they'll defend these failed systems endlessly and demand that they stay in place. No, let them fail. If folks take their children somewhere else and those schools go under, I'm okay with that. I really am. And by the way, if they allow themselves to go under just to poof and go away, shame on them. They could have straightened up and said, we better bone up and get our world together. That, to me, I think, is what competition is about. And I think that's what made America great. Not things like 2 years of free education that will only drive the costs up. All of it, I started to say this in the first segment, all of it, they attach everything to the 1%.
Yep.
Okay, but then I asked myself, speaking of gun violence, and then I asked myself, well, they're always talking about the 99 percenters and against the 1% that are rich. I thought, well, gun violence, how come they don't talk about the 99%, way over 99% math-wise, by the way, way over 99% math-wise, that would never hurt anybody with their firearms. Instead, they focus on the way under 1%. That's just fascinating math to me. We'll take these 99% and go to war against the 1%, but as soon as it's on an issue that they don't agree with, that math is gone. Then they don't want to use that formula anymore. I think that's kind of weird.
So he's talking about creating opportunity, and obviously we already have that, and it's not working then because we have affirmative action and all these other laws against discrimination. That's also trying to help create opportunity.
Yeah, listen, affirmative action has worked for some people. Percentage-wise, though, it's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Imagine me telling you...
Government involved, right?
It is government help, but listen, the problem, and it does work for some folks. I'm not trying to ignore that. So but I pause and think it is a really racist statement to say...
Oh, I hate it.
To say that you cannot make it because of your DNA, and I think, what? You tell me because of the color of my skin or for whatever silly reason that I can't? Now listen, I'm white and someone's going to live, there you are, another fat old white guy talking about this. But listen, I was born with a heart defect. And so when I look at it, I've had the government helping me, wanting, by the way, I pushed them back. I've had them wanting to help me every step of the way. When I was 17, 18, 19 years old, they immediately in fact, they did. I remember the episode, maybe you weren't around back then, when I talked about, I had one of my first jobs. I was sitting in there one day, and in these people walked, and they walked right by my desk. I was in a big open floor area at a bank. These two people, I'll never remember, I remember like it was yesterday, they walk past my desk and they go into my boss's office. They clearly had an appointment. And I didn't know this at the time, but who they were is they were people from the state of Michigan that were there to tell my boss that if they kept me employed, they would pay for half my health care costs in a large portion of my wages. And I thought, you know what? Wait a minute, darn it. I got this job because of me. I'm still employed here because of my effort. I didn't ask for their help. They were aware that and they followed me because when I was in third grade, just to put this in perspective, when I was in third grade, they helped with tutorship while I was going through a major open heart surgery. So from that service they provided, now I'm an adult, and they literally went into my employer to offer those things. I found that to be the absolute most insulting thing literally the single most insulting thing in my entire lifetime career-wise. I really did. It was like, well, we know you've got to do. Listen, I took karate for years. I taught karate. I stand back and I go, I don't think I need you to that's not the case. It's just silliness and insulting and degrading. But to tell an entire block of people, you cannot make it without us, is obnoxious at the very least.
I agree, and we have to teach. I have to teach this chapter in my classes, and I always tell them right off the bat, this is the hardest chapter to teach, because I think that all this is crap, and the fact of hire the best person in front of you doesn't even matter what they're. Go in the blindfold and ask them questions. And then I start going through some of the things that these do, and I ask my minority students, does this upset you? And then after explaining it all, they're like, yeah, it really irritates me that I'm going to get the job because of what I look like.
Right.
Not because of what you're good at, but because of what you look like, you're going to get it.
World
I
peace.
don't want that.
World peace. World peace. President says that we need a smarter approach. I'm hoping he's not referring to his handling of Syria or Benghazi or sending the bust of Winston Churchill back to the Brits. When I look at his foreign policy, it is the only thing about his administration that was worse than his domestic policy. It was an absolute embarrassment, and a lot of people died. Everyone whoever's opposing my view right now is immediately saying, "What about George Bush?" And I say, you know what? We can all like or dislike George Bush, but cause and effect arguments don't work. They didn't work for George Bush. They don't work for Obama. We need to pause. One of the things that President Obama said last night, along with we need a smarter approach, is he was chiding those folks within the Republican candidate field that he believes are I can't even think of the word now, inward. He said we can't look inward. And I think, maybe he's right, but on one hand he wants to compliment the Founding Fathers, and then on the next hand he said we can't look inward. And I look back to almost all of the almost all of them, certainly all of the key Founding Fathers, said that we should have trade with all nations in alliance with none. Now, that's not the same as not being exceptional and helping people when they're down, whether it's to yours or my difference on where help should be. That's not the same as that. That's the same as saying we're not going to get embroiled in battles that have been fighting for millennium after millennium. Why would we take treasury in American life to do that? Ben Franklin, George Washington, all of these guys, Thomas Jefferson, who used to be the star of the Democratic Party until they realized that classical liberalism is not the same as socialism, and then they just within the last year or so said no more of that. They still embrace Jackson, I think.
I don't know, because aren't they trying to take him off the money? Jackson? Yeah.
I don't know.
They're trying to take him off the 20.
I don't know. Jackson was a terrible president.
They want Harriet Tubman on the 20. Or another prominent woman. It was a big deal. But I think they're actually changing it now to the
I don't know that they actually wanted to do that. I think that was part of the war on women spiel that they gave, which didn't make any sense. If you look at the state representatives in the 2nd District, almost all of them, I think there are 2 that are male, and the overwhelming majority are female.
Holly?
Yep, Holly Hughes from this district we're sitting in.
Daniela Garcia? You've got Amanda Price. And before Holly, there was a Democrat that was a female. Before Amanda Price, you had Barb Vanderveen. That's just not true. Our Secretary of State is Ruth Johnson. Yeah.
The former Secretary of State before that was a female, and the one before that was a female, and the one before that was... You got to go, wait a minute. You guys are the ones that had Austin in there for absolutely forever. Yeah. I don't know. Enough of that. But when I heard that at the time, I thought they were just using that as another lever to try to produce that reaction.
It's funny you use the word socialism, because something really stuck out with me in the whole debate, or the thing he put in last night. A pay gap. If you lose your job and you have to take a job that pays lower than what you originally made, he said that we should pay the difference to you.
But when he says we, He meant the 1%.
Yes.
Who are also going to be paying for the health care overrides and the education overrides. But if you do the math, if you take their entire worth of the 1%, it won't pay for any one of those. Mm-mm. So and just buy it. Just you can get a $2 calculator from your choice of discount store, and just do the math. It literally 1%. Those folks that are earning 1%, their total net worth won't pay for the health care or the education or any of the things that he's talking about. So you go, okay, well, where's the money really coming from? Those things are fascinating. Listen, folks, we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into a little bit of Enigma report as it pertains to the balance.
And we return to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And it's now the third segment. That means the Enigma report.
It is kind of the Enigma report. Listen, have you been following the story? It's like the sequel to the Bundy story out west.
Yeah, a little bit. This the one with the organ.
Well, there's the two folks that had the big dispute over the federal land.
Yeah.
They ended up being jailed, and then their sentence was added to, which is a separate debate. I'm not sure I know how that worked, but I'm certainly not a lawyer, and I didn't follow the legal side of that close enough. But then we watched the Bundy sons get involved, and the two folks that were at the center of it were saying, hey, stop, we don't want your help. We'll pay our price, go ahead and go. And the Bundys evidently felt that staying involved was critical. And of course, the media immediately paints the Bundys as nuts. I don't know them, so I don't know if they are or not. What I do know is that if you look at land ownership in the western states, it is I think, I can't tell you that, I don't have a map in front of me, but I think 86 or 87% of Nevada, as an example, is owned by the feds. I think the state that they're having this dispute in is a little over 50%, seems near plus or minus 50% of the state is owned by the federal government. And that's true with most of the states west of the Mississippi, where they've got a huge influx of land percentage. In fact, you can probably pull it up on your iPhone. That'll show you the percent of each state that's owned by the federal government. And it's pretty significant. And what's happened is over the years, there's been a push and pull between the ranchers who have historically used both their own land and public lands to feed on. Yeah, Matt's holding a picture up for me right now. This doesn't necessarily give the actual math, but when you look at it, it shows it's a white map with an overlay of red that represents federal. For instance, Michigan, we've got very little federal land. Most of it is from where we're at going north, but very, very little. More in the UP than in the Lower Peninsula, certainly. But when you look at the western states, actually from North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, from that line going west, it is hugely, overwhelmingly federal property. And so now what you've got is this war on something that's been going on for many generations. And the uber left media, and I'm not talking about your average media that agrees or disagrees, but the uber left media, when they paint the picture, they paint it that these ranchers are wanting something for free and they're getting a free ride using these federal lands when it's not their property. And the reality of it is that going back as long as we've been ranching in western states, those vacant lands, or public lands, if you will, have always been free range. That's the term, free range lands. And what's happened in the last decade or so, by the way, primarily in the last 6 years, is that the Land Development Authority, the government arm out there, has decided to start converting a lot of that public land into nature preserves. And under that new definition, they're telling the ranchers you can't ranch here anymore. It's an interesting thing for America because, listen, we like the beef that they're producing. Most of us do. And that's where a large portion of it is we're slowly painting ourselves into all kinds of just silly corners. And so when I was reading this story, in fact, the story I was reading, the larger but quieter than Bundy push to take over federal land. And it's an article written in the New York Times by a guy named Jack Healy, and he's describing some of the legislators in those various states, specifically one of them, that is mounting a legal move for states' rights to protect those lands that have, for generation after millennium, been using those lands for ranching. He's trying to preserve that use and pushing back against the federal government. The Bureau of Land Management, I think, is the name of the government side of the debate. At any rate, so I'm reading all of these stories, and it occurs to me that we're still fighting a fight that the United States has been fighting since before our constitutional founding, when it was a confederacy. Please understand, folks, I'm not talking about the Civil War. I'm talking about before George Washington was president. During the first 10 presidents that were not constitutional presidents, it was a confederacy. From that point, from our very founding as colonies forward, there's been an ongoing push and pull with our founders, by the way, over what the proper balance between state and federal government ought to be. We are still fighting that. Now, we've labeled it differently. We've labeled it differently because nowadays, if you say states' rights, a lot of the uber left, and not your average Democrat walking down the street, but a lot of the uber left immediately want to paint you as a racist. States' rights, you're talking about the Civil War, you must be a racist. No, I'm talking about the First Confederacy. The ongoing historical United States of America argument over what is the proper balance of power. And I'm not even broaching what's the proper role of government, because frankly, I think when you get off into what's the proper role of government, what you're really debating is what is the proper balance. And in my view, things like education, our founding, where we made ourselves exceptional, if we can all agree that America has had times when it was exceptional or that it is exceptional, it was founded, that exceptionalism, first off, came from our democratic Republican form of government. So before you throw something at me, Google it. And from that's really what, citizen sovereignty is what made us exceptional. That I can have this conversation with you on the air right now. Those things have made us our freedom of speech. In fact, I said a couple weeks ago in an episode, I talked about the First Amendment is, in my view, what made us exceptional. So I believe those things. So all throughout our history, we've had this ongoing debate over the size and scope of government. My belief is this. I think that once we lost the state's right to secede, okay, the federal government became the government. And the balance of the states, whatever the number was coming forward, had been nothing more than glorified regional tax collection centers. And how I mean to say that is that, for instance, nowadays, the states are largely controlled by how the government gives us our own money back, which I find fascinating. You want a grant, that's some of your federal money back to you, and a lot of our elected officials will be all happy, thinking, looky, we get some of our federal money back. It was never supposed to be that way. If we had a federal government that was in balance with the power that it should be in a Republican, small r, in a Republican form of government, what it would be forced to do is provide an exceptional service to the states so that the states didn't want to secede. That's how the federal government was set up. The Fed was going to be so wonderful and provide such a service, not overbearing, that nobody would want to secede. And of course, once that right to secede was melted away, prosecuted by a civil war, found to be historical rather than current by the Supreme Court in 1869, once those mechanisms happened, then the federal government could be whatever the heck it wanted to be, and there's nothing you could do about it, period. And so it no longer focused on being responsible to citizens, it became responsible to its own needs. So when people say, jeepers, how the heck did we end up with a government that's beyond its borders with a $20 trillion debt, and people think that makes sense, it's because it's serving itself, not you. Okay, and if President Obama in his address yesterday talked about equal opportunity, folks, if you really want equal opportunity, you need to find a way to get rid of the $20 trillion debt. And no, that's beyond the 1% net worth times a whole bunch. You can't just tax the folks and say, okay, well, look, we're done with the $20 trillion debt. We got to back ourselves out and start looking at a balance of power between the states and the Fed that makes sense. And I passionately believe that. Education, I touched on that for a minute. To me, education should be a township level. So you know how much I like seeing it on a federal level. The folks in Iowa and the folks in Louisiana have very, very different needs. President Obama said that last night. He talked about the fact that we're a diverse country and each different region has different views and different needs. And I thought, yeah, that's true. Why do you force education like it's a saddle and a mouthpiece for a horse? Why would you do that to all of America? Because that need doesn't fit that way. So if you had local township teaching, and I just use that as one example of a government that is, it serves itself and power. We talked about 87% in one of the segments. They get to be the usher of the books, and that comes in campaign contributions and all kind of other mechanisms. And what do you think, Matt? Am I off in the ditch here?
No, I agree. One of the things I keep thinking about is my government class, and when I was in high school, which was 17 years ago.
So to me, that's like last week. But
I'm trying to think back. Did we learn anything about state government? No. All we learned about was federal government, and I wonder if that really the shift of balance of power from the states to the federal government's been instilled in the citizenry, because most people wouldn't be able to tell you who their state rep is. Maybe not even the governor.
Before the Civil War, if someone asked you what your citizenship was, you'd probably say Michigan.
Yeah.
I'm a Michigander. Now, following that, you're a U.S. citizen. And by the way, I love being a U.S. citizen. Please, folks, don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. But the only thing that Tip O'Neill's ever said I agreed with is that all politics is local. Okay, if I don't like what Amanda Price, my state representative, is doing, or what people in this area, if you don't like what Holly's doing, I can go to one of her district hour meetings. I can't sit down with the president anymore.
No.
But I can go to local representation and say, hey, what are you doing? And I often do, by the way. I think that's my civic duty. Not something I ought to do, or, oh, jeepers, here comes Mike again. It's what I believe we all must do, is engage and pull close to ourselves our civic duty. And if we did, just by the nature of us doing that, the federal government would shrink back within its constitutional borders.
I agree. I believe with that.
I think that's the way I see it. Listen, folks, we're in the final 30 seconds, according to Brian Thomas. What I'd like to have you do, if you would, is follow me on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt, and take a look at us on Facebook, / The Mike Hewitt Show. And I think we need to do something different with our .com. We're not updating it enough.
No, we're going to work on that bit.
Yeah, it's terrible. 15 seconds, Brian says. That's what I need you to do. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook, by the way. Next